Welcome back to Morning Joe. Beautiful live picture, 7:46 in the morning at the United States Capitol. The House there is expected to vote today on a bill to renew the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund after emotional testimony, you'll remember last month, from first responders drew attention to the fund's 2020 expiration date. The funds provide necessary financial support for the thousands who suffered serious medical issues after the 2001 attacks and the work they did cleaning up. The Congressional Budget Office estimates a price tag of more than $10 billion that will cover costs for the next decade. Joining us now, a member of the House Homeland Security and Veterans Affairs Committee, Democratic Congressman Max Rose of New York. He is a veteran of the war in Afghanistan and the recipient of the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. Also with us, President of the International Association of Firefighters, Harold Schaper. Gentlemen, good morning. It's good to have you both with us. Congressman, let me start with you. Are we sure this is going to pass today?
Hey, Willie, how you doing? You know, absolutely, we're sure it's going to pass today. This was a difficult slog, but because of the incredible advocacy from our first responders, we're at the finish line. But we're not going to spike the football. The Senate has got to pass this as well. We're confident they will. And then the President of the United States will remember that he is a New Yorker, and he will sign this legislation. But what's critical here is that this is a permanent reauthorization. We are not going to put these men and women who are there for us through another shameful period of advocacy to come down here and defend their own lives. We're not going to do that to them.
And that's so important to point out, Congressman, because as you said, people like the late detective Luis Alvarez of the New York Police Department had to come down just before his 69th chemotherapy treatment to bang on doors, to bang the desk with Jon Stewart to get these Congress people to sit up and take notice. What is your read, Congressman, of why it took that effort? Why is this not an obvious vote for people you work with?
Well, look, nothing is easy in this town, but what I will say, though, is that any person, any member in the Senate or the House who has tweeted out on 9/11 will never forget, who has come down to New York City and taken selfies with cops and firemen and then tried to pound their chest and show how strong they are, they have no right to vote against this bill. They will reveal themselves as hypocrites to the American people. What's also, though, important, let's take a step back here. We are going to show, when we pass this legislation, we are going to show the American people that Congress can get something done, that we can actually serve people in large, substantive ways. And I think that's critical, especially at this time when we are continually torn apart by hyperpartisanship and divisiveness.
So, Harold, as you know much better than I, this problem plagues your community of firefighters, 343 of whom died in the attacks themselves, many more of whom have now died since from what they breathed in on that toxic pile. Can you lay out for our viewers just the extent and the scope of the problem?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that with the thousands of firefighters, law enforcement, other first responders, in addition to all the other building trades and other workers, but within our profession, we had firefighters throughout this country that came to work on ground zero in that pile. We have thousands of firefighters who are now afflicted with cancers, respiratory, and other 9/11 related diseases. Just in New York City alone, we've lost 195 FDNY members since 9/11. And those numbers, unfortunately, are going to continue to grow. This is an extremely enormous problem. And it's a shame, quite frankly, that it took 5 years to pass the original legislation in 2010, and then they forced firefighters, first responders to come back 5 years later to reauthorize it. And now here we are once again expected to come before Congress to ask for an additional reauthorization. So I want to applaud the House of Representatives, certainly the leadership, certainly Jerry Nadler, Carol Maloney, Peter King, so many that have now put this legislation in a place where at about noon today, there'll be an overwhelming vote to pass it in the House of Representatives. But Willie, here's the point. Now we have to go over to the United States Senate, and that's a totally different body. And even though we have 71 co-sponsors on the legislation over there, including 44 Democrats, 25 Republicans, and 2 independents. This comes down to their rules. This comes down to the uniqueness of the Senate body and Leader McConnell, and whether or not this House bill should be and can be brought directly before the Senate for a vote, or will it begin to get tied up in their unique process.
And Heidi, the Majority Leader McConnell has said he will take this up if and when it passes the House before the August recess.
This does seem to be all but assured, especially given the lens that was put on this by Jon Stewart and others, that this is now on a fast track. And Congressman, I have a question for you about another really important issue that you've been working on, which is veteran suicide. I know after a week in which we saw 3 veterans in 1 week's period try to commit suicide, you rolled out a bill to try and require more reporting out of the VA, but that just touches the tip of the issue.
Absolutely.
How substantial is this problem right now, and what does our government need to be doing about it? This seems like another issue where potentially you could see some bipartisan cooperation.
Well, I definitely think we can see bipartisan cooperation here. I'd also like to note that the NYPD has recently suffered a series of suicides. So this is something as well that we're seeing in the law enforcement community as well as throughout the country. What's critical, though, is that we have got to push the VA to start looking beyond its own 4 walls, extending out care management programs, mental health programs, expanding the degree of holistic treatment that we're offering. But the elephant in the room as well is the fact that we are losing so many people each and every day who never started their VA care in the first place. We have got to eliminate the stigma about going to the VA as well as receiving mental health and experiencing personal trauma. I have friends myself who I deployed with downrange who are going through hard times, and I know that we are trying to be there for each other. But my hope is that we can continue to build on the infrastructure that the VA presents to make sure that we are not losing so many veterans each and every day to suicide.
Noah?
Congressman, I'm going to pivot a little bit to politics. I got to ask you about the apparent tensions within the caucus. The Speaker, Nancy Pelosi,
I can always rely on you, buddy. I can always rely on you,
pretty difficult. Yeah, you know, I mean, this is what really moves the needle. Has been saying some tough things about progressive members of your caucus. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently said that she is frustrated by the, quote, persistent singling out. It got to a point where it's just outright disrespectful. The explicit singling out of newly elected women of color. Implication about Nancy Pelosi is pretty clear there. What do you make of those comments?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to allow you to fuel a reality TV drama that only
quoting
produces.
the Speaker of your caucus, sir.
No, I know you are. I love getting into our little tussles. What this does, in all seriousness, is it only leads to hardworking men and women, cops, firemen, who we were just talking about, people living in public housing, and God knows who else, to be continued to be ignored by Washington, D.C. Just think about this for a second, okay? Donald Trump runs on a series of platforms, making our roads and bridges great again, draining the swamp. He proceeds to ignore all those proposals. Mitch McConnell continues to show an unbelievable sociopathic intransience whenever it comes to any legislation that we pass in the House and present to him in the Senate. And then you have the Democratic caucus that is always teetering on the edge of this type of back and forth Twitter drama. We have got to refocus our energies in a bipartisan and bicameral way on the bread and butter issues that the American people actually care about. And I assure you that this type of Twitter back and forth, the American people couldn't give a damn, and neither do I.
Guys,
I give an amen to Congressman Max on that one.
Amen. On that.
Thank you, Reverend.
I see a show in the near future, Rose and Rothman on New York One, with pass out some issues
Weather
about
on the tubes,
bridge
right?
in Staten Island. Harold, before I let you go, let me just ask you about what else. We're going to hope and assume, and we'll certainly be holding people accountable as we watch this vote today in the House, but also later in the Senate. The people who had the hashtag never forget on all their tweets, we'll see if they forgot or not when this vote comes up. What else do your firefighters need, big picture? What are you looking at beyond this vote?
Well, you know, I was just listening to the conversation concerning behavioral health, and that within our profession, post-traumatic stress, behavioral health issues are a critical issue. And we need to be able to depend on the support, the resources to address that. The stigma that the congressman mentioned is unfortunately part of what we established within our profession many decades ago, and it's something we're trying to address, bring the issues out of the shadows into the light. Unfortunately, right now we have more IFF members that are dying self-imposed from suicide than we are in line of duty deaths. So it's a critical health issue, and it's an issue that needs the attention from all levels of government, and certainly the Congress can look at providing funding and support for us to provide the peer support that's needed and the infrastructure that's needed and the treatment and recovery that's needed.
Well, we appreciate your being here to speak for those heroes. The president of the International Association of Firefighters, Harold Schaperger, thank you very much. Congressman Max Rose, always good to see you and hear from you as well.
Great to see you as well. Thanks, brother.
All right, coming up next, new polling of the 2020 Democratic race has Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren leading the pack. We'll dig into the numbers and where South Carolina voters stand on those candidates as well. Plus, former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson will be our guest. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.